Our webinar today is UCS Powertool and PowerShell Expertise in an Hour, and it's going to be presented to us by Chris Shockey. Chris has served as a consulting architect in Cisco's data center and the optimization group for the past 5 years. Chris has been working on cloud-based architectures since early 2000 when he was at Microsoft working on the first ever hosted exchange and collaboration projects. His primary focus is on enterprise and service provider hybrid cloud architectures, automation and orchestration, and virtualization. Prior to Cisco, Chris was an architect with Microsoft, Hitachi, and 4 successful startup companies. So we're very happy to have Chris with us today, and he's going to provide some very useful information. Chris, welcome. We're looking forward to your presentation.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Chris Shockey. I'm an architect with Cisco Advanced Services focused on UCS, automation orchestration, and hybrid enterprise and service provider-based cloud architecture and strategy. Today I'm going to walk you through the fastest way to get to production-ready code for UCS using Powertool and PowerShell. Now, we all know that DevOps is becoming an important, and you could even say a critical piece of IT operations during a 12-month IT lifecycle. So taking the time out to get to know these tools and practices is going to become non-optional for future IT jobs. So this session's main goal is to get you, in a way, prepared for that. PowerShell itself is a great starting programming language to learn, because once you understand it, it will become much easier to understand both scripting languages like Python, Bash, and Perl, but also higher level programming languages that are object-oriented like Java, and managed code languages like C#. Now, the only reason this can be done in hours is because I've created a script template, or a shell, if you will, that will skip much of the iterative learning required to get to expertise level code. So the template itself becomes the protective shell around which you can turn the scripts you want to run in production into professional error and exception handling code. Now, it's not my expectation, unless you have like an eidetic memory, to consume everything I'm going over today. That's okay though. We're going to make both the materials and training video accessible publicly so you can use it as a reference. What I can guarantee is that you'll have that reference to go back to as you start ramping up. What I can also guarantee is that A, your total coding time will be reduced from what could be weeks to days or even hours, and the chance of you adversely affecting production systems will be reduced. All right, now so we're clear, if you're expecting marketing, that's not going to happen today. We're going to be diving deep technically. So you'll need to grab your bootstraps and get your mind set. So let's go through it. Let's go talk about our agenda. So we're going to go over the resource links, which I feel like I've set up a set of links which will give you everything that you need to get yourself going with PowerShell and Powertool. Next, we'll go over the general flow of the script template, kind of top to bottom. We'll also go over the IDE, which is called PowerGUI, as the IDE you use to actually write code is a really critical decision to make in order to ease you into working with PowerShell and Powertool. Then we'll deep dive on the template structure, and then we'll walk through kind of step-by-step creating a script using the template. And if we have time, I'll show a few examples of scripts I've written for some of my larger customers. And then we'll kick back with the cold one, but I'm from Seattle, so kicking back with the cold one is more vanilla latte. So let's go over the resources. The IDE, this is the Integrated Development Environment, so what that stands for. And PowerGUI is just basically what you'll use. It's a tool to use to make it much easier to write PowerShell and work with Powertool. Powertool is a module for PowerShell that you can use to access UCS, UCS C-Series servers, and UCS Central. In Powertool, the library for Powertool, the amount of commandlets in it, which is around 4,000, is actually one of the largest PowerShell libraries in the world. It's actually larger than the Windows operating system PowerShell library. We're going to go over PowerShell verbs. This has to do with naming practices. We'll go over that later. Help in scripts. So help files for scripts are important, and they're really specific. So we're going to go over that too. For those in the audience that are really just PowerShell beginners, Microsoft has a great link, getting started link that's there. And then from a Cisco perspective, if you ever need Powertool help, there's this UCS-Powertool alias. And everyone, all the heavy hitters within the PowerShell Powertool community within Cisco are on this alias, including the actual developers of our Powertool. So, and then the templates I'm going to be showing today, I've got a communities page out there, and you'll be able to hit that link. From a creation perspective, it's pretty straightforward. It's just we're going to be opening up the template. We're going to save it as a different name. We're going to use convert to UCS commandlet while UCSM GUI is open. We're going to do stuff inside of that GUI, and then we're going to copy that into the template and create a new script. So as promised, that's all the PowerPoint that we're going to have for today. So we're going to move right into the demo. Yeah, so if you guys have questions, please feel free. I brought in a real heavy hitter. His name's Joe Martin. He's who the White House calls when they need UCS and PowerShell help. So he'll be able to answer all your questions. I'm not sure what other panels we have because I'm in a different view. But if you have questions, please put them down. I hope we have time at the end. If you don't get your questions answered, you can always send mail to chris.shockey@cisco.com, and I'll be there for you. All right, so moving in. So this is the Power GUI editor. Now, Microsoft also has an IDE that you can use called the ISE. I prefer Power GUI editor. I feel like it's superior right now, though the ISE is catching up. So this is what I'm going to recommend for you to use. There's a couple key components here. This little box right here is where we're going to write all our code. This is a PowerShell console, and it's just like you have this PowerShell console. There's no difference between the two. So as you're running, are you flashing? So as you're running through this, when you're running your scripts up here, the output will display down here, just like that. So we just wrote a little PowerShell. All right, so up here, or over on this side, this is, for my coders in the class, this is where all of your environmentals are, your objects, your strings, and the like. For my non-coders in the class, this represents the run space or session of your PowerShell. So if I have a variable, call it my bar equals. So these variables get put in, and when they get actually set, you can see over here, my bar, this is the Power GUI script editor. So that's how that works. So this is all your variables that are happening within the script. This is a huge, huge help in troubleshooting. So when we actually when we do an actual PowerShell script too, this comes with IntelliSense. So, like I said, that script library for UCS is pretty huge. Well, as you can see, there's an auto-completing IntelliSense. So if we we wanted to get UCS VLAN, we'd be able to just type in a few words, and then it's actually going to give you all the parameters that you would put into that. So this is really almost a must-have for doing coding, especially with UCS. All right, so next, up here is where we actually insert parameters. So if you've ever run a PowerShell script like get UCS VLAN, So these are all the parameters that I could put inside of this commandlet itself, like cloud. Well, as we're saving a file and we're creating a script, the parameters that we set inside of our script will actually end up going into this box. And then the last thing is modules. So PowerShell is a library-based programming language. So UCS Powertool is a library of commandlets for use with UCS that can be run through PowerShell. We call those modules. So lots of different manufacturers have modules for PowerShell. EMC has a module, NetApp has a module. Microsoft obviously have a directive internally in the company that any Microsoft OS or application will have a PowerShell module associated with it. So when we say PowerTool, we're saying the module that handles UCS, UCS Central, and UCS C-Series. So within Power GUI, we can look at it through this PowerShell libraries. And inside of PowerShell libraries is going to be all the modules that I can use within Power GUI. Now, you specifically don't need to worry about that because within the template, it's automatically going to do all that for you. It's going to import all the modules that are necessary as long as they're installed. So here's all the modules. You can see our Cisco modules here, UCS Manager Central and our IMC, and there's a core too. But there's also other modules. Like I do a lot of work with Microsoft, so you can see I've also had the Virtual Machine Manager core libraries also that I use in order to mess with VMM. Then obviously all the Windows libraries are core to Windows. All right, so that's Power GUI. So next we're going to move on to the template. So this is the complete structure of the template itself. It starts with a help file. This is a Microsoft standard help file. So this is exactly how your help files can be written. So I've already created an example help file. The only caveat to doing this help file is this caret in, caret out, and then these dot notation parameters, dot parameter, dot description. These will actually set it up so that when a user does a get help versus your script that you're creating with this, it will format out correctly. There's also another weird caveat. You have to have 2 spaces here, or you actually won't be able to run the get help command. So you can see like between 55 and 56 here, it's got to be 2 spaces. Now, what that get help looks like is this. So when you created this, and I'm running a little command here just called get help .template UCS script.ps1, that's what the get help outputs as. You can also do a detailed, and this gives you the entire syntax. So this is also showing the parameters. You can kind of see over here parameter directory, and then also the examples. So the only kind of trick here is that this C:\PS caret, that's actually added by the method here of generating the help file. So when you do write your examples here, you want this script to be at the top of the example. And then it'll always come out looking nice and clean and professional. All right, so that's the help file. Now, as we move down, so these are the commandlets. Bindings. So the commandlet bindings, these parameters are a way we let users interact with our scripts. So there are inputs that are either required or optional that a user enters in order to get the information enough to use in order to accomplish the task we're trying to accomplish. Then we set, there's a global section. This global section is just setting some global variables that we need. So report, error exception class, and this stuff is things that you need to know. We're just clearing all the errors, and then we're getting the name of the script we're running in order to use that to do some things later on. This is the set of library functions I've created over the years. This is the kind of engine that drives this script. So these aren't something that you would want to modify unless you have more of a kind of expert level understanding of PowerShell. This is a my function template that I've set up for you. So the my function template, this is what you can just copy and paste to create functions, your own functions. And then this is the main program area. So the main program area, everything that gets set starts here by setting up the script environment. So that's all that code that's in the library section here. That's what we're going to go through. So how the script is going to start is that we're going to call this function. Actually, let me walk you through this really quick. So in PowerShell, you can actually call out to other scripts in order to use functions in other scripts. So by using this little notation right here. So if I put a dot and then I push this to another PowerShell script, and I have a function in there that I want to use for this script, I can just put this little dot notation here, and it'll call back out to that script and allow me to use that function. This is really useful for me for when I'm creating new sets of code. I'll actually call out to my global library, so I don't actually have to have this section in my script. But I obviously write scripts, these things for customers, so at the end of the day, every script I have has to be self-contained, so I don't usually use this, so only in testing. Now from here, so we're running in and we set up the ASUCS script environment. What that does is everything here is obviously in order for how it's going to get used. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to validate running as admin, and that's what happens right here. So this is just running a quick admin check. You can't really get a lot done or move forward in PowerShell unless you're running in a context of at least a power user and administrator. Next thing we do is we validate our PowerShell library. So PowerShell, the Powertool has changed a lot from 1.0 to 2.0. And over time, the directories in which those modules I discussed earlier have the location of them has changed. So what this does is this just handles all those location changes. So it starts with trying to load 2.0, then it'll try to load 1.5, and then it'll try to load 1.0. There's also another issue around run spaces. So a run space within PowerShell is a section of memory in which I'm running that program that holds all my functions and variables, basically everything that I'm doing. So you usually, if you're just beginning with PowerShell, you don't realize there's a run space or a context that you're running under. But with UCS and the way that I've set up the script, which will work against multiple domains at the same time, we actually need to establish a different session or different run space for each UCS domain that we're connecting to. So I'm going to call them sessions, and they're handled by handles. But in the context of PowerShell, it's a run space. So what I do is I set within PowerShell the ability to run multiple run spaces or multiple sessions outside of the default session against UCS. And that has an important context later on, which we'll go over. Next is generating the actual list of UCS domains that we're going to go against. So what this does is with this script, you can either go by name. So I can put up here -name 192. And that's going to generate an IP list inside of this array. So what I can do is I can, from running from a multiple domains perspective, is add in other domains. And what that's going to do is it's just going to take these IPs and put them into a list. You can also make a CSV file. So I have customers with 15, 20 domains. So we just create a CSV path for all of those domains, and then we import that CSV file so that we don't have to write out every IP address in a little name statement like this. Now, it'll technically do both. So if you put in, some IPs and you put in a CSV file, it'll aggregate all of those together. So the next one is, this is UCS FI Connect. This is a really complicated part of this script. So there's a lot of kind of hang-ups that can happen within UCS because there's a lot of configuration from an administrative portal perspective. So, there's HTTP to HTTPS redirection. You could be using HTTP or HTTPS. Also, there's some domain name handling that needs to happen, like if you're using LDAP-based names to authenticate to UCS. So what this section does is it's kind of run in two modes. One is just standard mode, which is I'm just going to use a single user account, and I'm going to attempt to log into everything in the UCS manager list. So every IP that we got inside of that list, we're going to try to log into. The other way is this run offline. So what run offline does is that it's going to cache credentials locally in order for you to be able to run without having to log in every time you run the script. Now, what this is really meant for is, as you're testing, you don't want to keep on logging in as you're writing your code or running your code and testing it. Technically, this could be used to run as a service or a scheduled task with the credentials cached locally. I try to move against that. I only allow, this is the only thing that's statically set inside of code. So I only allow admin to actually log in when doing a run offline. That is the way, so because if you're an expert, you could come in here and you could modify this so it could run with domain credentials pretty easily. But from an attack surface perspective, I'm going to force you to do that because I don't want to be responsible. So where that gets set up, I'll just give you some context to run offline. Everything by default outputs to UCS Powertool out on your C drive. That can be changed, obviously. So where that comes in is it gets set into the secure directory. And then the password is hash inside of this text file. So this is a practice done within Windows deployment services for caching a password for deploying bare metal hosts. So the secure directory, if you are going to run this, let's say as a service, is something where you would actually go in and hard set the security around this folder itself. So, it wouldn't be users read execute, it'd be users nothing. And then a specific set of maybe a service accounts group or some type of tightened security to actually secure that folder. Now from the hash itself, I could not take this file, copy it, and move it to a different computer and actually be able to run against this without using the credential. This actual hash will only work on the server in which it was created. So that's kind of the context of run offline. We're going to be using this dash run offline ourselves. So. And then everything else is a lot of this, there's a little caveat within UCS, the actual XML library for UCS, that domain names are case sensitive. So if I attempt to log into UCS with a domain / context, the domain name itself has to be case sensitive matching to how it was set in UCSM. So this just does a bunch of domain to upper to lower and then capitalizing the first letter. Hopefully that takes care of most of the domain issues. But every time I have a customer come in and say, hey, I'm trying to use, domain credentials for my PowerShell, it's not working, that's the first thing I have them look at, and that's usually the issue. But this takes care of all that for you. So all that pain just kind of gets rid of it. This is the output directory. So like I said, everything is going to output to UCS Powertool out. You could obviously change this, and this doesn't have to be a local file share. It could be a remote file share, so like //. And then the script name, so that every time you create or run a script and use this, it's always going to output as the script name. So you can see I've run lots of scripts. This is my development environment. But you can see the output name is always these folders. So it's the name of the script itself that you're running. And that's all done dynamically. You don't have to set that. You can also use -directory in the parameter section to change that. All right, so this get AS credential. This is not actually called within the script. So like I said, I do a lot of work on Microsoft type orchestration. So I needed a way to do service account file credential caching. So this is the same thing. So if you are going to try to do credential caching, I just recommend that you also cache the actual account that it's, hash the actual account that it's using. And that's what this is for. So this is just kind of like a block to, if you want to do domain credential run offline mode type stuff, this is what you would use to do that, or it's a way to do that. So for my coders in the class, you're going to understand this. For my non-coders, you're not, but there's kind of two types of errors. There's a normal error in which I've miswrote my code in a way that I'm not getting the result I want. And then there's an exception. So the typical PowerShell exceptions aren't really great. So I actually wrote my own exception handler because I needed more information. And I needed, from a troubleshooting perspective, I needed to be easier also. And further, when I use this script, the exception comes out. I actually have my email in here, right there, so that users who use my scripts can contact me if they ever run into issues. But this is kind of a useful tool so for you to be able to put in the information that you want for your own exceptions. And I can actually show you an example of that. I set up a little so you're never supposed to divide by 0 in coding. It says you're going to blow up your computer, so we're going to see right now if it blows it up. We'll open up our little output screen here, clear it out. So we're going to try to run a div 0, and that should give me an exception. So there we go. So we got a nice little exception here. So what this is going to do is this is going to tell you from which function the problem happened. So you can see your UCS function. So you're going to be able to know exactly where that function is. Gives you just the version information, the error brief, and then the actual code block that was the problem. So @line 712, @line 686. So I got this other one here too. So if you write let's say, get UCS tech support as a command within the get UCS PowerShell library. So this is more likely what you're going to see from an exception perspective. So I put in some parameters here, blah, 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 that are not defined within get UCS tech support. Oh, I'm still diving 0. Get rid of that. So there you go. So you're always going to know what your code block is. That's the problem. The @line entering from, so this is where the error occurred with 686. I added in entering from because that can be helpful also, so you know what was actually calling it. So this is 711. So you can see this is where it came in from with your UCS. All right. So that's our error handling. We can get rid of that too. Okay, and then finally, all right, so this is something that's not really considered inside of PowerShell because from the context, I'm going to start talking about some security, and security can always get people nervous, but I want to talk about actual attack surface from a PowerShell perspective. So when I open up a run space in a set of memory, hackers look for variables that were once created that no longer have a value associated with them. It's called a null value. We don't want to leave null values out in our code when we're programming. So all our variables, it should all look clean like this after we're done running a run space. But that's really hard for people to even think about when they're running inside of something like this, when they're running actually in just a typical PowerShell window. So we've got to do that for them. Now, from attack surface perspective, I mean, to not make it sound like terrible, it would be really hard for a hacker to find, let's say, an orchestration server that has a PowerShell worker process that runs PowerShell scripts, to look for that, know where the script is, know what to look for, know the memory space to look in, know the variables to look for. It would be difficult. So this is really, like, hackers can find much easier ways to compromise systems, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't take care of it. So we do. So this is what all this does is whether there's an exception. So even inside of our exception handler, even if there's an exception, we'll still run cleanup UCS AS environment. So if there's an exception, we'll clean up, and then after our script is complete down here, we'll also clean up. And all we're doing is we're just cleaning up all script variables. All right, so that's how the template works. That's what it's doing for you. Now we're going to walk through how to actually use it, and we're going to do some specific examples. But first, we have to actually create a file. So that's what we're going to do first. So when we've opened up this template, what we do is we just want to save it as. And then we're going to do, because of our time, something relatively simple. We're just going to do an add AS UCS VLAN. And we're going to call it that. All right, so now we've got a new file. Now, typically what we'd start with is just a help file, add a VLAN to UCS, then some descriptions. Next thing we'd be looking at is from our parameters. We'll come back to that, but from a parameters perspective, we really just want the names, we want the ability to be able to run offline. So let's just start with that. We're going to start simple. So we know that your UCS function, this UCS handle list, this is the list of logged into UCS domains that we're going to act against, which is eventually going to call this function. Now, from a function perspective, a function is just a container for some code. That's all it is. There's nothing super special about it, and it has the same parameters that you call at the top. So it's the same context. We're just not adding in all of this complexity. We're simplifying the actual parameter section. So you can see, like up here, this string UCSM running check, it's the same thing that this is doing right here. So string directory, string CSV path, same stuff, same thing. So a function is just a way of containing a set of code and the variables that you're using inside of it. So any variables that are defined and set inside of here will go away once we exit the function. And this is where you would want to start writing your code, is right here. So how this is coming in is that this is doing this for each UCS handle list, each handle. So this UCS handle list is obviously an array of logged in UCS instances. Now we want to iterate through all of them one by one. And that's where for each comes in. It just iterates through everything that's in that array. So each handle is a UCS handle or a UCS session against a UCS domain. Now the tool we're going to use is, and this is super cool, is convert to UCS commandlet. And you can see there's a UCS central commandlet too. But we're going to use convert to UCS commandlet. And what we're going to do is let's say I don't know what the PowerShell commandlet is for creating a VLAN. It's get UCS VLAN, but let's pretend like we don't know. So what we can do is we can just add a VLAN to one of our domains. But let's say we're worried because we got 20 domains, we want to make sure they all get added correctly, and we want it to be done right like the first time. And we'll just, let's say it's just like a production domain. And it's going to be ID 9, let's call it 31. Well, as you can see down here, convert to UCS commandlet just created that the PowerShell for what I just did in the GUI. So get UCS LAN cloud add. So we're going to get rid of 931 really quick. Going to delete that. Yes. And then you can see the same thing. Exactly the command needed to remove that. So all we have to do is copy this. We've got to stop the script. So if you look up top here, this is stop debugging. If you ever want to run the script, it's the play button right here. And we're just going to paste this in here. So there we go. So now we've got a professional add UCS VLAN script that we can run. So let's make sure it works. This is going to run, as you can see, against both of my FI domains. So I hit play, and we have an exception. Right. So this is perfect. Remember when I was talking about run spaces? Well, this is exactly what happened. This is trying to run under the default run space, but there is no UCS connection under the default run space. It's all held in these handles. So all we need to do for every get UCS script there's a dash UCS that we just need to add that handle to. So from your commands, you're just adding dash UCS handle. So as long as you add this into your commands, you're going to be able to run against those multiple domains. Clear that out, and we'll hit play again. All right, so now you can see I got shock site 1 and shock site 2, and you see that the VLANs have been added, 931, 931, shock site 2. So it's just that easy. We've written a script to add VLANs in a couple seconds. Now, this isn't super useful because I would have to come into code and actually statically assign this. So let's change that. So let's create a parameter for VLAN. That's a string. Just got to add a comma after each one of these parameters. And let's just call it VLAN. All right. And then up here, since we added that parameter in, we'll want our users to actually be using dash VLAN. Let's say we're going to add, let's say we'll add 932. So all we need to do is take this VLAN parameter and add that into the appropriate points of the script. VLAN ID and name, we're just going to leave it the same. $VLAN, $VLAN. So now we have a script that'll work where we can add VLANs, add will. Well, let's check. We should make sure. So there you go. Now we've got a script, an add VLAN script, 932, 932. And we were able to write that in a few minutes. So without any kind of real hassle. All right, so let's talk about try-catch. So this is what every piece of code you have and every function you write, I want you to always use until you get to a more advanced level and you're ready to kind of write your own kind of structure. Just always use this function structure. Always use try catch. So try catch will save you from all sorts of really bad things that can happen in code, especially when you're running against multiple domains. And so always use try catch. All right, so we're going to close that out. So now how much farther can you go with this? I want to give you some examples here. So this is an example of a script I wrote for taking care of 5500 and MDS configurations. So, Joe Martin on the phone has actually even taken this a step farther, where he actually jumps into the MDS and even NetApp and configures all the LUNs on the fly. But for you guys, this is basically a script that is going to output an MDS M5500 configuration based on how you've configured UCS. So it can be used as both a configuration tool and a verification tool. So let's run this really quick. Oops. That's right, we still got VLAN up here. All right. So think about when you're configuring any server system, really, how long does it take you to work out, especially in a boot from SAN environment, what your Nexus and MDS configurations are going to be? Does it take you days? Does it take you weeks? It can take a while, especially in really large environments, which is specifically what this was written for. But literally, that was in seconds. I've just created those configuration files for 2 completely different domains. Just to give you a little proof in the pudding there. So you can see it's created A and B side configuration files for both MDS and for Nexus. So here's your 5500 config, complete with VPCs. It understands that there's port channels. Also, if it sees that you've configured jumbo frames, it'll slip in the jumbo frame configuration from a QoS policy perspective and from the port perspective. And then on the MDS side, same thing. So it's going to do all the configured device aliasing, zoning, and the zone sets. So this is something this is the power of Powertool, right? So this is something that can take a long time to configure, and it's something that you could get done in seconds, just with some relative simple code. And what the template's going to help you out with is you can just focus on getting the actual functionality created without having to focus on all of this stuff. Making sure you're logged in correctly, making sure the modules are loaded correctly, making sure you have default UCS instances turned on. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You can just worry about what you need to do. Also, since it's PowerShell, you have access to your virtualization environment. So whether it's Hyper-V or VMware, which both have PowerShell modules associated with them, you can start doing interesting things around integrating both your hardware platform into your actual hybrid platform, be it virtualized or be it public. And it's different for service provider, but so for all my service providers out there, that's a longer story. But here's a simple script where I've got a couple of servers here. This is my virtualization environment, and these are all the NICs. So Hyper-V, we need lots of NICs, man. We got private side virtual switches, public side virtual switches, management NICs. I'm just going to say vMotion NICs for all my VMware users out there. And it's really confusing when you're actually trying to run in and troubleshoot a problem, and you can't really figure out which one is doing which. So with UCS, we have the ability to match a MAC with a nickname, right? Because we create VNIC profiles that have names associated with them. Those names are associated in pools that have max. So we can actually come through and sync our UCS nicknames to our operating system nicknames. So we've got to give the Windows credentials. Now, obviously, some servers aren't going to be ready. I got some servers off. This is the one we were looking at right there, it's 2 on F10, so we'll go check that out. Bang. So now I know exactly what all these NICs are. Okay, that's my management NIC. That's my public cluster NIC. That's my private cluster NIC. There's my 2 virtual switches, my public virtual switch, my private virtual switch. And we're networking guys, so we'd like to know what the MAC addresses are. So I add the MAC addresses in. But you know what I mean? It's something like you can configure any name you want for that thing as you're moving forward. So, you know, I challenge you to think of UCS in a way as from a ITIL perspective, it is a true CMS. And all the information in UCS is live, right? There isn't an external database to the domain itself that holds that information. That is live information. That is the best broker, best CMDB you can have is a live database. So you have programmatic access to that live database, which means that you can take that information and with context push configuration. This is a really important concept and a really kind of cool part of how UCS works, which I could go into further, but we can't. So, folks, I hope this was useful for you. I hope I showed you how to quickly create professional, safe scripts. It would be really super helpful if you guys could just finish out. There's like 4 questions on the polling side. So if you could just fill out those 4 polling questions, it'd be really useful to me. Not the speaker stuff, but like especially your DevOps model, it's interesting for me to know, and you're a really eclectic group of folks. So we got 5 minutes. I have time actually after this meeting. If anybody wants to ask questions, I'm totally open to that. But that is it for the presentation. And then later you will get emailed all of these informational resources. This is all free to you, so enjoy.
And we thank Chris for being with us and Joe for being here as backup. And please do, if you have questions, park them in the Q&A channel or get our attention, and we'll let you. We'll unmute you so you can ask a question directly to Chris. Let me share just one moment here. If you want to talk a little bit about this, I will share my screen and show everyone exactly what you provided to us. They'll find very interesting. And I just put it here. We do have an actual reading list form that will be published on TKL, but Chris was very gracious in providing us his reading list, which I think helps give you even more insight into Chris as to what he likes to read, things that he finds helpful. Is there anything you'd like to say about these, Chris?
You know, let me put it from the context of a tried and true, have bled in the trenches operations guy. That getting things done, the art of stress-free productivity, I take my free time real seriously, so I try to be super careful about the books that I pick up from a, you know, personal growth perspective. This one is really, really good. If you feel stressed out, like, you know, you might be missing things or things may be rolling off your plate or you feel like you don't have a handle on everything that's going on in your life, you know, whether it be professionally or personally, this has some awesome insights on getting that stress level down and actually doing exactly what it's talking about, which is stress-free productivity. I would highly recommend that book. literally took me from feeling like I was running a million miles an hour all the time down to feeling completely in control of everything that's going on in my work and personal life. So Joe Martin on the phone actually is probably he didn't need to read the book. He is that book. But yeah, so I definitely highly recommend that. I actually, highly recommend Harvard Business Review. It's a little expensive. I think it's like in the $130 range for a year subscription, but you get access to not only that, but every single article they've ever published. There's some really great insights that come out of that. So if you're any one of these, if you're an architect or you're a technology person that's thinking about, going into management or looking at management, that's a great route to go, to start thinking along those lines and thinking along those contexts. And from an architect's perspective, I think it's important for us to be able to understand the business side relationship that is affected by the decisions we make from a technology perspective.
I'm checking the Q&A panel right now. And at this time, I don't see any questions. Are there any out there? I know we're at the top of the hour and people are going to have to be dropping. But as Chris said, he does have a few moments and could stay on for anyone that would like to stay and ask questions. And I would like to remind everyone that we do have that polling panel open that Chris mentioned. So please do take some time to answer those questions, in addition to the standard questions that we at TKL ask after every webinar. Chris has added some of his own that are very interesting that would be helpful to him in possibly working with you in the future or seeing just where you're at, giving him an idea of what's going on with each of you. So do take a moment to answer those polling questions before you leave. Any last words you'd have for our attendees today?
No, hey, I know we're kind of all in this together and we're all trying to drive towards hybrid, be it enterprise or service provider, cloud strategies. The one thing I would leave you with is realize if you feel like you're struggling, you're not alone. Everyone is struggling across the board in trying to make, proper decisions on what are effectively, can be multi-million dollar decisions that need to be made for the next 2 to 5 years of your business's focus, direction, and growth. So it is, lots of companies are struggling with it. If you're taking the time to step back and really look at every part of the effects overall from a technology and from a business perspective, you're going about the right path and you're not falling behind. Please do that work. It's gonna highly benefit you, as opposed to people that are really kind of just jumping in without thinking some of those kind of critical points through. And then definitely use Powertool, use PowerShell to affect those changes as you're moving into orchestration, automation, and DevOps.
Thanks again, Chris. I appreciate that. Joe, thank you for joining us as well. Laura, thank you for helping me host this webinar today. And with that, we'll conclude the webinar. I will leave the polling questions up for a few more moments so the last of you before you leave can complete those. Thanks again, everyone.